Can we please bring in Scott Laughlin of SiriusXM NHL Radio on a very busy hockey day? Scott, 2 points before I turn it over to you. Please hold your response to the end. Number one, a thank you for making me feel so happy every morning when I listen to you, and I have for years. You and Gordon just makes me happy to tune it on and start running. And number two, like at the gym. And number two, brother, if you weren't watching The Breakfast Club in the 80s and you don't know who cult leader Jim Jones was, what the hell were you doing? You're not up on 70s and 80s pop culture. What were you doing?
Oh, it's a great question, Rod. Yeah, I've never seen The Breakfast Club, and I've never seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And people are always like, what? How can you have not seen that movie? And then I get into the 90s or whatever the heck it was, I guess right around the Mighty Ducks. And when that trilogy came out, I said, look, I'm proud to say I have not seen one Mighty Ducks movie either, and I don't think it's on my things to do list anytime soon. I'm sorry about that, Rod.
It's all good, man. I don't know what you were into music, though. I'm not a music guy. You're a big music guy, right?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I would say that probably on average, I listen to at least 1 hour of music every day. And I've always said music's great because depending on what kind of mood you're in, it can bring you up, it can bring you down, somewhere in between. I think there's always something that kind of fits the bill. And if I may say so, that's why I love SiriusXM, actually, because there's a genre and a decade of music for whatever flips your fancy.
Oh, it's amazing. It's really, really, really good. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you to take a swing at our poll question today. It is, what's the Leafs' concern level? What should it be? High, moderate, or low with all they got going on into Game 2 tonight?
Yeah, I voted for high. I think there are many questions right now with regards to their goaltending. I think it's a tough time of the year, certainly, to have these questions. And you say, okay, our number one's not going. How about number two? Well, number two hasn't been the same since coming back from that high ankle sprain that kept him out for a couple of months. He's far from the goalie that he once was. So I think they go back to Samsonov tonight. You roll the dice. You hope he gets it back again, because if not, it could be a very, very quick series. Because when we saw what we saw on Saturday night, it doesn't give you a lot of hope that if you're a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, that this is going to be a long and competitive series. Tonight will tell the tale, though. They've got to be smarter, stay out of the penalty box, and certainly a goal from Matthews or a goal from Marner, that would certainly help the cause, I think, as far as the Leafs' perspective goes.
Do you watch all teams the same amount, or would you say you watch, like the Leafs, for instance, because you're in Toronto more than the other teams, or you know what I'm saying? Who do you watch the most?
Well, it's a great question, Rod. I mean, look, I grew up in these parts, so obviously that's my first go-to game. But the great thing about what we do on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio is the fact that we get to cover 32 teams. And if I had to talk, quite frankly, day after day after day about the third and the fourth line of the Toronto Maple Leafs, or the seventh defenseman, and whether or not he can draw in at the expense of TJ Brody, that would get to be a little bit boring, a little bit monotonous as far as I'm concerned. So I'd much rather talk about all the other NHL teams, which makes it a lot of fun.
Well, the reason I ask is you can't watch them all. There isn't enough time in the day, and you're not a general manager, so it's not really your job. But the point is, when the Panthers were up there in Toronto, if you recall, they were up 5-1 Toronto after 2 periods. Panthers stormed back, and the Leafs barely held on, but they toyed with the Panthers that night. It was a Monday. They toyed with them. And I was like, uh-oh. Now I'm sitting there going, where did those guys go? Was that a one-off?
Yeah, I think it was, Rod. I mean, this is a different type of game. I mean, you've watched it long enough. I've watched it long enough. We know it's a different type of game come playoffs. Austin Matthews hasn't scored a lot the last number of playoff games, and 69 goals is great, but you've got to find a way to put the puck into the empty net early in the second period on Saturday night to draw your team even. Mitch Marner's got to find a way to make a play. Heck, at this point, William Nylander's got to find some way to get back on the ice. If all this happens, then the Leafs can be more like the team that they are. They, a lot of times, are a team that has to outscore their mistakes. And if you're not scoring at playoff time, what are you doing? Because that's what this Toronto Maple Leafs team is composed of. Offensive-type players, hopefully some timely saves, and good enough defense to win. But if you're not getting the offense, the Leafs don't have a chance.
Okay, well, there's always an upset in round one, at least one. Last year it was Florida over Boston. What have you identified this year, do you think?
Well, you know what? I'm still staying, Rod, with the Predators in 7 games over the Vancouver Canucks. I think from what we saw last night, I think for a couple of periods, Nashville proved that they can play that frustrating type style. They really limited Vancouver's opportunity. They went to sleep for about 12 seconds, as we know, and that really cost them the game. But I think when you talk about UC Soros, you've got the perennial playoff guys like Ron O'Reilly, Philip Forsberg, although I thought he was kind of invisible last night for Nashville. I think when you throw in some Roman Josi, Luke Shen, Ryan McDonough, these veteran guys who've been around and done it before and made some long playoff runs, I'm still taking Nashville to win in 7 games over the Vancouver Canucks, which is hard to say because that atmosphere last night at BC, as we all saw, was lights out good.
BW in Edmonton writes in and says, I have not seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off either. That's from BW. So when people say, Bueller, you two are lost. You have no idea what they're
No. I'm
referencing when
aware
people
of
say
that phrase. I mean, it's been used so much, of course, in pop culture over the years. I'm well aware of it. I'm well aware of the fact that he used to walk around wearing a Gordie Howe number 9 Red Wing sweater. I know that much, but that's where my connection with that movie ends, Rod.
That was his friend Chip, not Ferris Bueller.
Okay.
But anyways, Navy Don, with regards, he's like, I'd love to see a Winnipeg Columbus Stanley Cup just to see the suit's hand ring. And I said, you got too big of a chip on your shoulder, Don. He goes, I'm a supporter of the little guys and gals that don't get respect from the suits in New York and Toronto. Do you think the NHL head office has a dream matchup in their mind? Would Winnipeg Columbus be curses and curtains for this league?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be for a ratings bonanza. It wouldn't be anything, of course, like that. I think ideally what they'd like to see clearly would be the Rangers against the Kings. Now, the chances of that happening are probably pretty slim, especially when it comes to the Los Angeles Kings winning the Western Conference. I would say that's probably what they'd look for. I know in 2012 we got close, right? We got New Jersey against the Kings back in 2012. We got the Rangers in against them, of course, in 2014 and that sort of thing. If they can go back to that sort of setup, I think that would be ideal. I have picked, Rod, and this will be music to your ears, I have picked the Florida Panthers to win the Stanley Cup, and the Panthers are going to beat the Winnipeg Jets in the Stanley Cup final. So I've got Florida over Winnipeg in what I'm calling the Paul Maurice Cup. I think that'll be decided coming up in about 2 months' time.
Wow. Dude, that's a book waiting to be written, by the way, because I sat there just listening to Paul Maurice at his news conference yesterday after the game going, this man is a genius. He's a savant. Yet time ran out in Winnipeg, and they got a great team, too. Like, what that says, I don't know, and it doesn't need to be sorted out today. But somebody needs to look into this and just go, what went down there? It's interesting, by the way, that you would say, because I said Dallas, Carolina. You're saying Winnipeg, Florida. Good friend of mine on the weekend, Trent Fraser, he's a hockey football guy, said Rangers, Canucks, rematch of 94. Do you ever remember where there's no clear-cut favorite at all?
Well, I mean, we just had to look to the final couple of weeks of the regular season, Rod, and all the teams, a handful of teams that were in it right up until the end to win the President's Trophy. So I think it's highly competitive right there at the top as well. Again, there were going to be some long shots. I think when you look at the Rangers Capitals series, I think that's what people first and foremost would say would be the most lopsided matchup on paper. And maybe from what we saw yesterday, I think that the Los Angeles Kings clearly are going to go into tonight's game at Edmonton as heavy underdogs in that series as well. But beyond that, though, anybody can make a run. And that's what makes this league so impressive, I think.
And coming off an all-time revenue record, $6.2 billion. Everything's good, and you're a huge part of that, Scott. So I'll thank you again. Thanks for making me so happy every morning, and keep up the great work. Enjoy the hockey.
All right, you too, Rod. Thanks for having me as always.
Scott Laughlin from SiriusXM NHL Radio.